Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Padres Mission Podcast. I'm Randy Holt with Steve Drumwright. Steve, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good, Randy. How about yourself?
I am okay. We're on episode 5 here. 5, right?
Yes, episode 5.
Feels like the Padres have lived a dozen different lives while we're just kind of staying the course over here. So tonight we're going to talk about, as we do, the last week of Padres baseball, for better and for worse, mostly for worse. Then we're going to talk about kind of the state of the Padres. Last week I came to you guys with a heavy dose of doom. I'm going to attempt to put on my best optimist mask and see kind of what happens, and Steve will look at the other side of things. Then, we'll strip all the context away and look at some trade candidates in the event that things continue to go south, and then we'll hit you guys with our typical last couple things with our minor league report, and then kind of wrapping things up from there as we approach the All-Star break. Getting into the week that was for the Padres, and I guess it's still going because they play in a little more than 45 minutes here. They were coming off that series against the Cubs, which not only it was a sweep, but they had the 23-3 loss and then had to turn around and go immediately into a series with the Dodgers. And I know, Steve, I told you a couple weeks ago, I like to avoid Dodger series because I am not a competitive person, but it also seems like the Padres avoided Dodger series too with the way things went in that one.
Yeah, that was certainly not a good transition for them. The Cubs series was a disaster, and then they went into the Dodger series, and we can jump right into that one. They actually came out. The Padres came out and they had a great start. They went up 6-0 after the first 2 innings. Looked really good. Then the wheels fell off. They were down 8-6, 4 innings, and it just went down from there. They lost 12-7 in that game. Randy Vasquez only went 3 innings, gave up 4 earned runs. He got hit in the ankle in the first inning, but then the scary situation happened after he left the game, where he actually fainted. He was on his way to get some x-rays at Dodger Stadium. Everything turned out to be okay. He would rejoin the team. He was taken to the hospital that night just to get checked out. Came back, rejoined the team at the team hotel the next morning. But they did put him on the injured list due to the ankle injury. It was an ankle bruise, so I'm wondering if it was the timing with the All-Star break that they just wanted to give him a little bit of a break, mentally and physically as well. And the Padres had another injury, also a little bit scary. Freddie Fermin got hit on the mask again by a Freddie Freeman foul ball. He didn't show any signs until a couple pitches later when they had a mound conference. Manager Craig Stammen was out on the mound there as well, and things did not look well for Fermin as the conversation was going there. And they called for the trainer. He was removed from the game, and he went on the injured list, not the concussion list. He went on a 10-day injured list as well for what they called a bruised head contusion. That's 2 key players right there out of the lineup. But that's a little bit of the news. But they were up 6-0 in that game, and whatever was affecting Vasquez, and that resulted in his fainting spell, affected his pitching in the first 3 innings. I don't know about that. It certainly could have. Went from 6-0, 8-6, to 12-7 final. Padres lost.
Yeah, and for me, that's more demoralizing than a 23-3 loss the previous day. If we're being on, 23-3, you get your ass kicked, your starter gets absolutely shelled, your backup catcher, who happened to be starting that day, gives up 8 of those runs. So it kind of is what it is. It's an easy game to throw in the garbage, but to turn around and not only build up a nice little lead the day after that happens, but then you lose Vasquez, who struggled before he got hurt, and then you lose Fermin. What an absolute mess. And, it's not like things got better because they turned right around on Friday and did the same thing.
Yeah, Friday was a little bit more encouraging until it wasn't. The Michael King, another really strong outing for him. He was cruising through 6 innings. then he had a low pitch count entering the seventh inning and gave up a walk and a single. And then Stammen went to the bullpen, brought in Adrian Morejon. 2 batters later, Teoscar Hernandez grand slam, went from a 3-0 lead to a 4-3 deficit, and that would end up being the final. I really can't blame that on Morejon. It's tough to put blame on that one. I think it was just one of those ones where, Stammen, the first 2 batters of the inning, I believe, were Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. So, if you were going to make a pitching change, you should have done it before then.
I was going to say, can I try to place a little blame? Because it feels like Stammen's having a really difficult time kind of measuring where Michael King is at in these games, because we've talked about it before where he's good until he's not. First time through especially, he's good, he's efficient, and then that efficiency starts to wane a little bit, and all of a sudden there's trouble. And we last week read off his numbers kind of each time through the order, and we know that the third time through the order things look really, really bad for him. So, given how things have gone for your rotation this year, it almost feels like Stammen should have just taken his 6 innings, been really happy with that, and called it. But as he has done, he floated King out for another inning. And, it's not like King imploded, but he left them in trouble, and it was a narrow lead to begin with. And that's how these things have gone for them, and for King specifically.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you on whether Stammen has a good, pulse of what to do between the starters and the bullpen right now. It doesn't seem like that. But the other part of that too is the previous 2 days were the 23-3 loss, and then the 12-7 loss, where the bullpen had to cover a lot of innings, and it could have been a roll of the dice for Stammen there. If King would have gotten through the 7th, Padres are looking really good. He didn't, and an overworked bullpen had to come in and didn't do the job for one of the rare times this year.
Yeah, fair. And for the third consecutive day after that, it's not like things got better, because Saturday kind of felt like a microcosm of the whole thing, where they didn't get a long outing. Griffin Canning did his bulk thing again, if we want to use bulk as loosely as possible, and the offense didn't show up. And I know you want to talk about some of their missed chances on Saturday.
Yeah, bulk is definitely not a word that you'd use. Canning did look a little bit better, but if he's only going 4 innings, what are we doing with him in a bulk role that way, especially with the way the bullpen is going. But yeah, the Padres were facing Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and they had a chance right there in the first inning to get something going. Fernando Tatis Jr. leadoff single. 2 outs later, Gavin Sheets had a single that moved Tatis to third, but that rally fizzled out when Ty France struck out, and then but then Xander Bogaerts led off the next inning with a single, but Jackson Merrill lined into a double play, and that was the end of that inning, and that was the end of the real chances that game. If you're not going to get an ace early, you're probably not going to get him.
Right, especially with how uneven the offense has been. Sunday, though, at least a glimmer of positivity. Interesting, given that Stammen and Ryan Goins were ejected 3 pitches in, and suddenly JP Sears is okay again and throws 5 innings and kind of cruises.
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
Yeah, everything made sense that day. My kind of working theory off of that game, just that game, alone, was the first inning, fired up everybody, and I think that's maybe something that, as things move forward, and as Stammen still continues to learn on the job, he's a first-year manager. He doesn't have any previous experience doing this. And some of these players like Machado, he played with, and so I think he's trying to find that balance between being a leader and being their friend, and that's a tough thing for, I don't think Stammen's done a bad job. I don't think he's done a great job, but I think, he's still learning a lot of the ins and outs, and I'm not sure how much help he's getting from the rest of his coaching staff there. But firing up after the 2 check swings on Tatis, Goins got ejected first, and then Stammen came out to get an explanation, and he got tossed as well. I thought that might have fired up the guys, and the reason why Sears was so effective. He only gave up one hit. He had a no hitter going into the fifth inning and gave up a single with two outs. But that was a really big win for them. There's no doubt about that. They had an 8-game losing streak going into that game, and then to come in with that type of a performance, that was as solid as they've looked since April.
Yeah, and to your point about stamina, we're going to talk about first half grades, and I'm sure he'll be a part of the conversation when we break down things and the state of the Padres next week. I kind of watched David Ross navigate a similar dynamic in Chicago early in his coaching career, and it didn't go particularly well for him. And it'd be interesting to kind of explore that dynamic and how those types of coaches who are managing players that they played with and what that all looks like. That's fascinating to me. But yeah. I felt like I needed to get that out of my system because you mentioned that. So as we've seen, some positive vibes coming out of a series, and then Monday they kind of fall flat and run into Brandon Pfaadt.
Yeah. And Brandon Pfaadt was just in AAA just a week or so before that. He's, as much as Manny Machado wanted to give him a little bit of credit for being part of the World Series team, you look at his track record. His track record is not good, and I think his career ERA is over 5 over like the 3 or 4 seasons that he's been in the bigs. But Walker Buehler was a big culprit in this one. He gave up 7 runs in 5 innings. 16. He also started the 23-3 Cubs game, and that's 16 runs that he's given up in his last 2 starts. And as we talked about, he had been one of the most consistent starters for the Padres before that. And now, as we talked about last week, if he's giving you that type of an outing, where are you with your rotation?
Right.
And I know that you want to talk about Walker Buehler.
Yeah, first I want to talk about Pfaadt real quick because mentioned when they played the Cubs that it was kind of just poor timing. It seems like it was poor timing on the other end because the Cubs bats were getting hot. For the Padres facing Brandon Pfaadt, it seems, I was listening to sports radio here in Arizona today, and it seems like he was tipping his pitches early in the year. And he's shown some capability of being a pretty effective starter. I mean, they signed him to a big extension. So, if he was in fact tipping his pitches earlier this year and he got right, then I'm not too worried about that end of things. But the Walker Buehler of it all is very problematic because 2 weeks ago we're talking about Walker Buehler kind of being the stabilizing force, and in 2026, I don't know how confident we should have felt saying that, but he just was like he was giving you these really mediocre outings that were kind of exactly what they needed. They were 5, maybe 6 if you were lucky. And the last 2 times through, he's just gotten absolutely knocked around. So if that's where we're at, like that's that one certainty you had outside of Michael King is looking as shaky as it is. So that's a genuine concern on top of all of the other concerns we already have about this rotation. Yeah.
I mean, just to come out and just lay an egg like that in the first game of that series, because the Padres knew that this is this 4-game series, which is ending tonight. They knew what was at stake for this series and this homestand. The last 7 games before the All-Star break, facing the team that you're right there with, battling for second place in the division, and they came out late at 8-0 again. So it's just really, really disappointing from a single game perspective.
Well, the good news is the last couple of nights, things have looked much better. Tuesday, they get the win, a 4-1 win. Not a ton happened late in that game, a lot of early action, but Germán Marquez coming out with some really nice velocity. And I know when he was on rehab assignment, they talked about his velocity being back up, but he was rolling it almost a 96-mile-an-hour fastball, which is definitely a kind of a full mile per hour where he was. And I think we mentioned this, but if not, I've written about it, just the idea of him getting the velocity up a little bit to just be that much more effective, because it's not about being the pitcher you used to be if you're on this Padres staff. It's just about volume. And if he's going to do that then I would feel a lot better about his place on this roster.
Yeah, I mean, he touched 98, which is really good for him. And if he can be a credible piece of the rotation, that alleviates some of the concern. But as we've seen, everybody has their ups and downs in this rotation, and nobody's been uber consistent this year that you can rely on. It was nice to see Jake Cronenworth. He hit a three-run homer. I believe it was the second inning. I don't know. It was a crazy situation before the game. He was taking grounders, and he got hit in the face, ground ball. And as we all know, he got hit in the face by a pitch in the Angels series back in April, and that led to a concussion. That sidelined him for 2 months. So he gets hit in the face in the pregame here. But he was cleared by doctors. He just with a bloody nose. He committed a first-inning error while he was playing first base. But then he comes up in second inning, I believe it was, and hit a 3-run homer, which was his first home run since he came back. And so his bat isn't always elite, but it is productive. And he was definitely missing in the 2 months that he was sidelined with the concussion.
Yeah, even if the approach is there, if he's going to give you the occasional power, it almost feels like a bonus. But that having that approach and kind of that guy who will work his way on base is a really nice addition. Wednesday, though, we finally got complimentary baseball.
Yeah, I don't know where this came from. Maybe it was the fact that they were facing a rookie pitcher making his fourth major league start. But Michael King was back on his game. Again, he looked good in his last start against the Dodgers, except that he was pushed a couple batters too long. King, 1 run over 6 innings, give up 4 hits, a couple walks, 4 strikeouts, and then the offense was on par. They didn't have any home runs. I'm sorry, they had the 1 home run from Luis Campusano, but Miguel Andujar had 3 doubles. Tatis, Jackson Merrill, and Campusano had a pair of hits. It was really nice to see and do some things, and there was some stuff on the bases too that helped make it a productive day for the Padres.
Yeah, and so they'll take on an uneven starter with Merrill Kelly and the Diamondbacks for the series finale tonight. But what do we talk about the record for the week? We wanted them to kind of split things if they can. Obviously, the ideal would have been to finish over 500 with this 8-game stretch, but if they can muster a win tonight, then they will have split. So even with kind of how bleak that Dodger series felt, they will at least have generated that, which feels okay. But that kind of thinking leads us into our primary discussion tonight, which is where are the Padres at? Are they done? Should we start kind of just put a fork in them, start thinking about trade candidates, or is there still some glimmer of positivity to be found?
Yeah.
And last week we kind of expressed some of the fears. Tonight we're gonna look at both sides. Steve, how do you want to do this?
You go first. Be Mr. Positive.
Okay, that is not a thing that I am known for in any walk of life, but I'm going to do my best here. So,
I was surprised when you chose to be Mr. Positive. So,
I think I was just riding a high of like, oh, they're hitting and they're pitching all in one game. I didn't know they could do this. So the standings right now, we're not even going to take the division into account. The wild card has the Cubs on top. The Phillies are behind them. Their game behind them, and then the Marlins, because the Miami Marlins, who I have not watched a second of this year, are refusing to lose over the last few weeks, and I don't know who is allowing that to happen, but it feels like it should be illegal. And then after that, so that's your top 3. It goes Cardinals, Nationals, and the Padres. Padres are 4.5 back. They're tied with the Pirates. They're a game ahead of the Diamondbacks, with potential to move 2 games ahead of the Diamondbacks tonight if they can snag another win in this series. Ultimately, you're working with the league's best bullpen. If you can manage to not continue to overwork them, and if the Padres are able to stay afloat over the next couple of weeks, ideally they'll grab another reliever or 2. But the offense has begun to ascend a little bit in a way that I think can help this team kind of stay. I mean, they spent – so I was looking at the numbers kind of month by month. at the end of May, they were one of the 5 worst teams in baseball on offense. Just keeping things kind of simple here. Their WRC plus was 85. So they were a low below average collective, which would have put them 27th in the league. No power to speak of, striking out at one of the league's higher rates. Just they're hitting freaking 218 as a team. Since the start of June, that's looked better. They're in the top half of the league in a number of different categories. Their batting average as a team is almost 20 points higher. Their isolated power's up, so that's looking better. They're striking out a touch less. But the last couple of weeks, it looks even better than that. So they're actually an above average offense. If we're going by WRC plus, they are the 14th ranked team, but they are at 104, which puts them above average. Their strikeout rate's down from what it was earlier in the year. The power is up. They're healthy on that side of the ball, which feels important. And, we've talked about the ascent of Fernando Tatis. We've talked about Manny Machado. The power's there at least, even if a lot of the other things are. I don't know what's going on with Jackson Merrill, but it feels like there's a number of different contributors now. Ty France looks pretty solid. Jake Cronenworth is back. So I feel okay about the offense in a way that I didn't think I would at this point in the year. And this is something we've talked about as well in our brief discussions of the standings. Like, these teams that are around you, it's unrealistic to think they're all going to stick around. Miami does that thing where they're suddenly good and make a run once every decade. I guess that could be this year, but the Cardinals don't feel like that team. The Nationals certainly don't feel like that team. The Pirates don't feel like that team. It stands to reason that the Padres could stick around in a way that allows AJ Preller to be aggressive and make the additions this team would need. I don't know if that's the right choice if we're looking at pure objectivity, because, you do have a number of shortcomings, but I do think that there's an opportunity here. They're not so far back out of that wild card because, let's face it, the Cubs are in first right now. They're even prone to going a month without hitting. So, and their bullpen is really, really bad. So, I mean, there's so many different factors going on with their competition. And if the offense is really on the upswing combined with that bullpen, I think they can survive the pitching, especially if they're given an opportunity to kind of make an addition or two there. So that is why I feel okay. I don't feel great saying all of those things. I'm not trying to paint myself as the eternal optimist here. There are certain restrictions on my thinking, but I feel decent.
Yeah, and I agree with some of those points that you made. Like, the offense is looking a lot better than it did in May. May was a disaster.
It's a low bar.
Yeah, it is a very low bar. And the teams that they're surrounded by in the standings. The Phillies, the Cubs and the Phillies, I think are, I kind of push them up the ladder there, and I think it's going to be everybody firing for one spot. And the Marlins actually have the same record as the Phillies at 51-42 entering today. But then, as you mentioned, it's the Cardinals and the Nationals ahead of the Padres. The Padres are 4.5 games.
Sorry to cut you off, Steve. Where is the congressional investigation into that? I mean, we're investigating the WNBA and the defense on Caitlin Clark, but why are we not investigating the Miami Marlins being in the playoff race at this stage of the season? That's something that I would like looked into.
Maybe it's because they're down in southern Florida. I don't know. Maybe they've got a pardon on that. I don't know. It's, I'm really happy to see the Marlins, to do that. They've made some smart trades over the last 2 years. 2 years ago at the trade deadline, they emptied out a lot of their roster. They turned over about half their roster at the trade deadline, and they acquired a bunch of young players, and some of them are coming through now, and then pitchers like Yuri Perez are coming through. It's kind of the old Marlins formula, pitching and young players. But I'm with you that the Cardinals, I'm not really confident in them. The Nationals, not confident in them. But both of
I
those
don't like
teams,
either team's pitching.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot
those
of
offenses could stick around, but I think their pitching might be worse than the Padres.
Yeah, there's a lot of elbow grease going into both of these teams right now, to try and get them to where they are. And then the Pirates are tied with the Padres, and then the D-backs are a game back. there's no world beaters in there, and anything can happen. I can see any of those teams, falling out. I can see all of those teams falling out, and that includes the Padres. The last few years, the lowest number of games that it's taken to get that number 3 wild card spot has been 83 games, and that was last year. And that was the lowest out of the last 4 years. In order for the Padres to get 83 wins right now, they'd have to go 37 and 33 the rest of the way. And that's at a pretty good clip. In that 83 and 79, that's a 512 winning percentage. That's what the Nationals are doing right now. So it's, the Padres have some work to do. And that, again, 83 wins was the lowest out of those years. So, you're talking like the Padres might have to go 40 wins the rest of the way, 40 and 30 to even be in contention for that last playoff spot. It's funny, in the telecast on ESPN on Wednesday, they kept talking about how the Padres were a game behind the Dodgers at the end of May 24th. It was, they were a half game behind the Dodgers, and it's just gone downhill since then. They've been 15 and 26 since then, while the Dodgers have gone 29 and 13. The National League West is sewn up right now, 14 games ahead of the Padres. The Padres are a 500 team. The National League West is done. It's the Dodgers are going to be the champion, and they're going to get a first round bye, and they tried for a three-peat. But it's been how the Padres have gotten here. Just in the last 2 weeks, on June 26th, after beating the Dodgers 7-1, the Padres had finally gotten back on the positive side of a run differential. They were up 1. I think it was 317, 316 in for run differential. Since then, 11 games going into tonight's game, Thursday night, they've been outscored 88 to 46. Yes, you can chalk up 20 of those runs to that Cubs fiasco, but then you're still talking 68 to 46 in the other 10 games. They're being outscored by an average of 8 to 4 every night. And that's not sustainable. It's between the starting pitching and, the offense being a Jekyll and Hyde, not disappearing against big starters and not taking advantage of some of the other guys that have handcuffed them. It's really, I don't see a path out of this. Anything can happen. Their offense can get hot. Tatis and Machado can start hitting home runs and getting on base more. Gavin Sheets can start hitting bombs all over the place. But the fact is, they're 22nd in home runs. They're last in runs scored. They've got a 226 batting average, which is last in the major leagues. Their batting average is last in the major leagues. Their on-base percentage is last in the major leagues. Their slugging percentage is 29th, only ahead of those mighty, mighty Guardians who, just continue to not hit. They're starting pitching, 4.70 ERA, which is 27th in their league. They're ahead of the A's, Rockies, and Astros. And as we all know, the A's and the Rockies play in some of the best offensive environments. They're giving up a 253 opponent average. That's 21st in baseball. Their bullpen, 3.71 ERA, but they're also throwing the 6th most innings in all of baseball. I think, the bullpen hasn't shown any cracks yet. But at some point, they need to get those innings out of the starting pitchers and in order to alleviate the pressure on the bullpen. And I'm not sure where that's coming from as it stands right now.
Yeah, that's all fair too. And one thing I thought about while you were talking, just about the general dominance of the Dodgers in the division, I wonder, not that I'm saying I disagree with anything you just said, but I wonder if there will be any kind of, we've talked about the mentality and the mental side, the psychological side for the Padres as the season has progressed. I wonder if there could be something freeing just about acknowledging that, like, the Dodgers own us. The Dodgers are so far embedded inside of the Padres' heads. Like, it never feels like those teams are playing the same sport almost, especially once they came back last week. It just kind of felt like that whole series was over. But with the division where it is, the fact that you only play the Dodgers, 3 more times, and it's towards the end of the year, I do wonder if, like, there could be some positive psychological aspect to be taken that, like, cool, we're just worried about this one thing now. I mean, that could just be nonsense that I'm fabricating to further try to make my case, but it also feels, given how things have gone against the Dodgers for the Padres the last few years, it just feels like something that could be something.
Yeah. We'll find out tonight, how tonight goes. And then they got the Blue Jays coming into town, and if you would have told me before the season that the Blue Jays were doing what the Blue Jays are doing, I wouldn't have believed you, because that was a really nice team that we saw in the World Series last year. And maybe they've got World Series hangover, but that just gives a lot of more credit to what the Dodgers have done these last couple of years. But if the Blue Jays have just been decimated by injuries, starting pitching, position players, now you got to think that if the Padres are going to get back into this, and they can get back into it, there is a path there, but they're going to have to sweep the Blue Jays this weekend.
Yeah, and the Blue Jays series is really interesting because the Diamondbacks series is interesting in the sense that, like, those two teams are kind of in a similar place in the standings, but there's not a lot of similar context. It feels like the Diamondbacks have a whole bunch of different things going wrong inside of their organization, and whenever I listen to sports radio, it just feels like a sense of despair. But the Blue Jays are in a very similar spot where it's like they're underperforming against expectations. They're fighting for a wild card. They're involved with a whole mess of teams. They have some upper tier talent that's not performing to what it needs to be. So I'm really interested to see. Obviously, they got to get through this game against this last game against the Diamondbacks, but it does feel like two really similar situations in almost not a last gasp, because I don't think this weekend is quite that yet, but it could be. We could frame it as that if we wanted to be really dramatic, but it's just the concept of those two contexts is striking to me.
Yeah. If they were further back in the wild card standings, if they were 6 games back at this point, I'd be even more doomier than we have been. But they're, as bad as the Padres played in general as a team, they still have a path, and that's what they need to latch onto. Listening to the guys talk after games, they know that, and they're it's not like they're not trying to battle out of this, I will disagree with anyone who says that players aren't trying to get out of this. They're fighting tooth and nail. Manny Machado doesn't want to hit below 200 the whole season. He's trying to get up. He's trying to get his batting average up. It's the starting pitchers. They don't want to suck so they're working hard. The coaching staff is working hard. Whether they're working on the right things, we're on the outside looking in. We can't tell. There is a path for the Padres being 4.5 games out of the wild card spot.
Yeah, and ultimately, if things do continue to go south, we will have plenty more time to talk about doom and kind of where things go. But for this last little bit of our Week 5 pod here, let's just consider the idea that things do continue to go a little bit south. And we'll talk plenty more about the trade deadline. We're coming up on a little more than 3 weeks away from it. So that stuff will be hot and heavy in the discussions. But if things, they go really sour tonight and then over the weekend and we're starting to feel even worse, let's talk about some potential trade candidates. And we don't need to go too far in detail because I'm sure we'll talk lots about these guys. But Steve, you kind of broke them down into 3 primary groups as far as these are your guys that would be easy to move. These are kind of some of the bigger decisions you would be facing. This is the blockbuster level. So let's talk about each of those. Yeah.
So if it comes down to, the Padres got a big 10-game road trip coming up after the All-Star break, and there's going to be a lot that's determined on what they're going to do on that. But if they do decide to sell, only if they do decide to sell, they've got some pieces that I think would be really attractive. And 3 of those come out of the bullpen. And Jason Adam, who's currently hurt, Adrian Morhone, and Wandy Peralta. Morhone and Peralta would be the easiest to move since they're not hurt. Adam might not come back until August. So you could see a situation where he's dealt for maybe a little bit less or maybe some contingent, like a player to be named later situation there. Then Walker Buehler, he's got the track record, and maybe some other team sees what the Padres don't and what needs to be fixed with him. He could be moved. From bats, they're looking at Miguel Andujar and Ty France. Andujar would be the more attractive player. He's just more productive overall. He's a doubles machine. France can play defense at first base, be a pinch hitter for someone. That was kind of his role for the Blue Jays when he got traded from the Twins last year. Those are the easy ones to move. Then we move on to guys that I think there's bigger decisions to make. Yeah, or go ahead. You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was gonna. It's an interesting dynamic because obviously, like, we see sellers on the market every year, and the Padres could very well reach that point. But it feels kind of rare that the majority of like your high value players come from the bullpen because the other phases have been so disappointing. So, like, yeah, Walker Buehler could get you something noteworthy, player to be named later at least. Ty France, same thing. Miguel Andujar would bring back a little bit more, but like Adrian Morejon is your most valuable realistic trade chip. And that's a little upsetting to me because I feel like he's such a fun pitcher to watch in this bullpen. And I was part of the group preseason that was hoping they'd give him a spin in the rotation and try to stretch him out. But, that's probably your biggest value among those players that would be easy calls because he is a free agent and he's performing at an elite level for a reliever. So any contender is going to want to bring in an arm like that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, all of those guys are guys that have contracts expiring after this year.
Right.
Those are why those guys are easy to move. They're going to be strictly rentals. But then we get into guys who might not be as easy to move and are more franchise level conversations. And no, I'm not talking about Manny Machado and Fernando Tatis. That I don't think that those guys are going to be moved with a new owner still waiting to be approved by Major League Baseball, which who knows, that might come this All-Star weekend or maybe later in July.
I do think we'll hear about Tatis. We won't hear about Machado, especially with the year he's having and his age and all that. I think we'll hear Tatis's name out there, but I don't think there's any reason to think that is realistic. He is your biggest offensive talent. He is your most marketable player. There's just no world where that's happening. He's probably second to last, and I think Jackson Merrill is the only player that's less likely to be traded because his contract's even more favorable.
Yeah, I would agree with you. They would have to be super blown away, and I just don't think that that's going to happen.
No,
I don't think that people are going to pay a major price to get Tatis off the Padres' hands, and I don't think AJ Preller is going to fold like that. But there's two contracts that I'm looking at that I think if they can get rid of, they would get rid of, and that's Xander Bogaerts and Jake Cronenworth. Bogaerts, he's technically the highest paid player on the team this year at $25.5 million, just a shade over what Manny Machado's making this year. Machado's contract extension takes a big jump next year. So, but, that contract runs through 2033, and if they're, I don't want, this is the fourth season of an 11-year contract. Do you want to see what he's doing, in 5 years, much less 7 years, making $25 million a year? That could be kind of scary.
I don't know that anybody does.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was just a bad contract to begin with, and maybe there's some takers in Boston where he's still beloved there, and they can use a shortstop.
He's a good player, and he's performing at a solid level, but there's no world where that contract can be justified.
Yeah, no, I would take a penny to a dollar to get rid of that contract. But then there's also Jake Cronenworth. As we talked about, he's a nice bat for what he does, but he's also under contract through 2030, and he's making a very reasonable $12.3 million a year. And I think that is a contract that could definitely be moved, and he could be attractive to a contender that is looking for a second baseman, or somebody who can go between first and second base. I think that of the franchise level players, he would be the easiest one to move. Michael King would be another one. He's got the weird contract where he's got an option for $28 million for next year and then $30 million after that. And I think that in order for him to be moved, you would have to agree to not exercise that option and just hit the free agent market for next year, because there's no team wants to pay him $28 million next year if he's going to be this inconsistent. Maybe his next time out, he fires another great 6 innings, but I would be hesitant if I'm another contender for $28 million next year and $30 million the year after. Maybe there's a team like the Yankees that would do something like that. Funny going back to the Yankees, but there's not many teams that will do that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, from that whole group, it's all really complicated in terms of these are guys you'd probably like to move, but doing so would be difficult. Cronenworth is definitely the most likely. I honestly think that after Morahone, he's somebody that you could probably extract a fair amount of value from, because his contract, he's under contract for another 4 seasons. It's a reasonable price point in terms of his AAV. He gives you average defense at second, a little bit below at first base if you needed to flip over there, and he's just an on-base machine. So I do think there are teams that would find that appealing. King, I can't see it. Bogarts, I can't see it as much as I would like to, because I think the Padres' lives would be easier if they were able to get out from under some of the Bogarts contract and maybe not have the anxiety of what King's going to do, especially as up and down as he's been. But these feel like the ideal. Like, if we can, let's do it. But if not, then we're going to be kind of stuck with them for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And then there's the one player that would shock everything. And there's been a lot of conversation publicly about him in recent days, and that's Mason Miller. He talked about this after the game the other day, or maybe it was before the game, that he knows that he's not, that there's a chance that people are going to come after him. And, it's going to be whether AJ Preller decides to pull the trigger on that and try to recoup some of the prospects that he lost last year, starting with Leo DeVries, who at the time was the number 3 player in all of baseball, number 3 prospect. The thing about Miller is that he's still under team control through, where was this? He's still got 3 more years of team control. So the value is still going to be there from a prospect point of view. Where they can still get a couple of top 100 prospects in baseball. But that would be the doom and gloom scenario if he's traded.
Yeah, Preller would definitely be admitting a lot of different things by trading Mason Miller, even if it is objectively his best chance at kind of starting to get this farm system back under control. It would be really unfortunate given the team control, and then you're kind of punting your late innings at that point, especially if Morahone and Miller are both moved. But, it's not an unrealistic scenario, but I do think it's at the back end of things that ultimately will happen, just because if the Padres fall out of contention, I have a really difficult time with them seeding 2027, assuming we had a 2027 season, but giving up simultaneously next year too, which would appear to be the case if they were to trade Morahone and Miller, and you start to feel a lot less good about kind of the most important or at least the best aspect of their entire roster.
Yeah, and there's not going to be a lot of time to rebuild something in this offseason, whatever it is. If there is a true offseason to be able to do transactions, it probably is not going to be.
All right, well, that's enough. That's enough doom. Yeah. I can't take any more. I don't even want to start thinking about what's going to happen on the labor side of things, because that takes us to another level of bleak, and the Padres have given us plenty. So let's talk about the minor leagues.
Yeah, so this is a fun weekend. So first of all, with the minor leagues, we got Ethan Salas and Kash Mayfield, the top prospect in the Padres system. They're playing in the Futures game on Sunday in Philadelphia, 9 a.m. Sunday on Peacock. You can get a chance to see those guys on TV against all the other top prospects in Major League Baseball. Also this weekend, it's the draft. And we got the first 4 rounds on Saturday, and then rounds 5 through 10 on Sunday. The Padres pick 21st in the first round, and they have a total of 5 picks on the first day. They got an extra pick because they gave a qualifying offer to Dylan Cease. They'll get that pick at the end of the 4th round because they are a competitive balance payer. But start to get to see some new prospect names eventually, and once they sign in a couple weeks after that.
Get familiar with all the names that AJ Preller is going to trade in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
All right, back with the big league club, though, they got the Blue Jays. We talked about what that series kind of looks like in terms of context. The pitching matchup, though, feels just ugly to me. Respectively, over those 3 games, the Padres are going to send J.P. Sears, Walker Buehler, and German Marquez against Shane Bieber, Trey Savage, and Kevin Gausman.
Yeah,
it's just funny to read. I know those guys aren't necessarily performing at the level their name is indicative of, but like it just feels very funny to me to read those pitching matchups.
I mean, especially J.P. Sears against Shane Bieber. I mean, that's hilarious in itself, just from a matchup point of view. But you're right. These guys haven't had the season that their names would say that they're having. So that's the chance. And the Jays are having troubles offensively as well. I mean, you talk about the power outage from Fernando Tatis Jr. Look at Vlad Guerrero Jr. I think he's got 4 home runs this year. That's as big of a disappointment as Tatis is having offensively, and Vlad Jr. isn't hitting as well as Fernando.
Right, as I say, he doesn't have the other things going for him that Tatis has at this point.
Yeah. But then we got the All-Star break coming after that. Home Run Derby on Monday, start game on Tuesday, and a couple more days off before the Padres start a huge 10-game road trip that will probably determine their fate or what they're going to do at the trade deadline. It's going to begin with 3 games in Kansas City, then 4 games at Atlanta, and followed up with 3 games against those pesky Marlins that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think what we're watching for in those matchups going into and coming out of the break is just like that 10 games. If we include, we'll extend it to include this weekend. That's going to tell us kind of everything we need to know about what happens after. So I think that's definitely kind of the thing we're just keeping an eye on is like, what are the outcomes and how does this impact them the rest of the way?
Yeah. It's, we've kind of said it the last couple of weeks. The next week is the biggest week of the Padres system of the Padres season. And that's just based on what they've shown us so far. They haven't shown us that glimmer of light that they're going to bust through the door and, just start hitting and start pitching together, and play good defense. They haven't shown us that yet. And they've still got time to do it.
Yeah. Well, here's hoping that 3 weeks from now, we're talking in a manner that's not so downtrodden. Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. But Steve, what do you want to leave us with for your final thought tonight?
I want to talk about Johnny Brito. Johnny Brito had internal brace surgery and flexor tendon surgery in April of last year. Didn't pitch a single major league game. He was injured in spring training. He finally came back and he was scheduled to pitch on Tuesday after German Marquez pitched. And he ended up coming in the 6th inning after Marquez went 5 in that game. Then Yuki Matsui actually started the 6th and got into a little bit of trouble. And Simon wanted to give him a clean inning, couldn't do it. He had to put him into a big jam. Runners, I believe, are on 1st and 2nd. First pitch he threw, double play grounder, and that was Johnny Brito's welcome back to the major leagues. He had a nice little first outing there, and just nice to see him back and healthy again.
Yeah, any arm that can give them something of value at this point is definitely a welcome presence. For me, I just want to talk quickly about Sung Moon Song because I feel like there was a point early on where we were wondering about this guy's playability. Like, can we let him take it back and we put him in the field because the defense didn't look good? I know defensive metrics over a small sample are almost useless entirely, but those didn't look good. And I realized I completely just contradicted myself. But He also was not hitting even a little bit. His first month, which was May, he played in 11 games. He hit 174, but things look a lot better over these last couple months. He hit 242 in June. He's at 238 in the little bit that we've seen him in July. The walk and strikeout rates all look good. Like he's a good contact bat. He's played 3 positions. We haven't seen the expanded versatility, and I think that's one of the things that I really want to see from him moving forward, because I think he's finally starting to stabilize a little bit to the point where he's been a little more competitive at the plate. He's got that kind of alignment between striking out and walking, but we were promised a player that could move to the outfield if needed, move to first base, and he hit 26 homers last year in South Korea and stole 25 bases. So I think those impact components of this game also, in addition to that expanded versatility, I'd be feeling really good about him if we see any of that before the year's over. But it's nice at least to see kind of some steady improvement for a guy who got kind of a slow start because of the oblique.
Yeah, no doubt. He had a really nice game Wednesday night. He started at third base with Manny Machado, who fouled the ball off his ankle. And he started at third base, had a really nice defensive play, and showed some good skills on the bases. Little swim move as he slid into third base there. I think he's still getting acclimated to everything, and that's something that people I don't think take a lot into consideration with players coming from Japan or South Korea or wherever. There's a culture shift for them, and it's whether Song's production came in his last 2 seasons in Korea, so there was a little bit of a hesitation there, and I think that's why he got the 4-year, $15 million contract instead of anything bigger than that. But it was nice to see him make some contributions, and hopefully we'll see a little bit more of that as the season wears on.
Yeah, and part of that too with that adjustment is like he's also a player who had that injury, so that adjustment is not going to be linear. It's going to take longer and move in a number of different directions because he didn't have a smooth transition coming out of the gate. So
he didn't have
definitely hoping for a little. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how things shape up, and he could be in line for more playing time depending on what happens ahead of the trade deadline. So we'll see what that all looks like. But Steve, thank you for another wonderful discussion. Yeah,
thank you, Randy. It's been fun talking about this. Hopefully we'll get some more positive things to talk about in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so next week we'll probably talk to you guys about kind of how we grade things out. We'll talk about positions, we'll talk about players, and a little bit smaller of a sample of games. So we'll just kind of do a big debrief. But until then, everybody have a wonderful night. Steve, have a wonderful weekend.
You too, Randy.
We'll talk to you guys next
Take care,
week.
everyone.